Welcome back. My name is Brijesh, and today we are going to start with the chapter number 6 of History, Class 8. So, today we'll be looking at the chapter Weavers, Iron Smelters, and Factory Owners. So, how the life of these weavers, iron smelters, and factory owners impacted because of the different policies of the East India Companies and later on under the British control. Okay, so let us understand. Earlier, we have already seen that how the life of the different tribes people and tribal communities impacted because of the different policies introduced by these East India Company. Okay, so let us dive into and understand the other characteristic which impacted the different aspects and the life of these people. So it provides or tells the story of the crafts and industries of the India during British rule by focusing on two industries, namely textile and iron and steel. So we understand that the textile industry was really big, and apart from this, iron and steel also became very prominent at that time. Okay, and played an important role. So why it was playing an important role? Because Britain started to industrialize, so it started to use all these iron and steels. Okay, so mechanized production of cotton textile made Britain the foremost industrial nations in the 19th century. And when its iron and steel industry started growing from the 1850, Britain came to be known as the workshop of the world. So remember this particular term, that when its iron and steel industry started growing from 1850. Okay, so that time, this particular duration, we consider it as the age of industrialization. Okay, and in this particular age of industrialization, British came to be known, or this Britain came to be known as the workshop of the world. So whenever there you come across any question that in that particular time, okay, which particular country is known as the workshop of the world, so do not forget the name of Britain. Okay, so in the late 18th century, the company was buying goods in India and exporting them to England and Europe, making profit through the sale. So we have already understood in the previous chapters also, and we will understand this particular chapter as well, that how in the past time as well, when the Britishers came in India as a trader, and they started to purchasing the things and started to sell it in the European part, not only in the England or particularly Britain, but in the other European countries as well. Okay, they were making huge profits. But after 1757 and 1764, how the events took place, and it changed the complete scenario, and which made these Britain or the uh, European company, this particular European company, East India Company, a dominant player in the Indian market. Okay, so they started to making huge amount because money, because they did not need to bring now the all the bullions. Okay, because they became the ones, and they were getting the revenue from the Indian subcontinent itself. Hence, the and also converted this particular place, Indian subcontinent, as their uh, as their place where they can supply their finished products. Okay, so we have already understood about the mercantilism as well. Okay, so the characteristics related to the mercantilism. Okay, so with the growth of the industrial production, British industrial began to see India as the vast market for their industrial products, and over the time, manufactured goods from Britain began to flooding India. So it is talking about the same thing which we have just discussed, that how the finished products started to coming to India. Okay, because the raw materials was available at very cheap rate. Hence, and apart from this, they now did not need to bring the bullion from the England. So all these were the positive things for the East India Company. Hence, it is getting huge amount of profit out of Indian subcontinent. Okay, and it converted the Indian subcontinent, which was earlier was self-sustained. Now it became dependent on the finished product which were we receiving from the Britain. Okay, now Indian textile and the world market, how it impacted. Around 1750, before the British conquered Bengal, India was by far world's largest producer of cotton textile. So we have already seen that the cotton still cotton, we are the dominant player in the cotton market, and at that time as well we were the dominant player in the cotton market, and the chalicos and all these things which India used to produce and used to sell in the European market was in huge demand. That how it changed? It traded in the Southeast Asia. They traded in the Southeast Asia, Java, Sumatra, and the Penang, and West and the Central Asia. Okay, so what was happening, that all these places which were there in the Southeast Asia, we were also trading there as well, and these things were easily taken from India and were getting sold in these places. Okay, at the left hand side, here I'm talking about this particular image. Here information has been provided that this is a patola art, okay, or patola work was woven in Surat, Ahmedabad, and Patan. So these are the places, remember this. Patola was woven in Surat, Ahmedabad, and Patan, and was mostly valued in Indonesia. So remember this, okay, because sometimes art and architect the straightforward question can be asked in the art section. Okay, so different type of story the world tells us, okay, in the history, that how the European traders first encountered fine cotton cloth from India carried by Arab merchant in Mosul in present day Iraq. So where was the Mosul? Mosul was in the Iraq, present day Iraq. So they began referring to all fine woven textile as muslin, okay, because the European came across this particular cotton cloth in Mosul, hence they started calling it as muslin. A word that acquired white currency. White currency means it started to gaining the name, or got the name from that particular place. Okay, so hence it called as the muslin. When the Portuguese first came to India in search of spices, they landed in Calicut on the Kerala coast in the southwest India. The cotton textile which they took back to Europe along with the spices came to be called as calicos. So remember this, why calicos? Because we understand and we know this story, that how Vasco da Gama came to the India in 1498 and he landed at Calicut, at Calicut on the Kerala coast. Okay, so when they took the cotton textile from here to Europe, because this they took it from the Calicut port or this particular area, they started to call it as the calicos, which means derived from Calicut. So these were the names which started to gaining the currency, okay, or the prominence, and subsequently calicos became the general name for all cotton textiles. That is how these names started to gain the prominence in the European world. Okay, so here the different account has been provided, that how different type of things or different type of cotton textile and other stuffs used to sell. So it has provided the information, but it is no use for us. We will just look at the important things which really matter for the examination purpose. So here amongst the pieces ordered in bulk were the printed cotton, okay, and the cloth called shint causes, which also called as the khasa or the bandana. So why these names? We will see that why these different names, because we have already understood that with the name of the where this particular thing has been originated, they used to call that particular textile with that particular name. So shints came from, it is derived from the Hindi word chint, a cloth with a small and colorful flowery design. Okay, so what was the they called as the shints? They used to call shints particular. It derived from a Hindi word chint. Okay, a cloth which was small and colorful and flowery in design. So rich people of England, including the Queen herself, wore the clothes of the Indian fabric. So understand the importance of the Indian fabric, that it was so famous. Okay, hence these all the European companies who which came in India, they started to trade in the cloth and the spices, and the Indian clothes were so much famous that the British Queen also herself used to wore the clothes of the Indian fabric. This was the reputation of the Indian textile. The word bandana now refers to any brightly colored and printed scarf for the neck or the head. So in the contemporary world, in the today's scenario as well, we call the bandana a cloth which we tie on head. Okay, so here the it has provided some information at the left hand side in the box that the printed design on the fine cloth shints produced in the Masulipatnam, where in Andhra Pradesh, Masulipatnam, okay, mid 19th century. So it has provided the information about that. Here, look at this beautiful cloth. Okay, so it has flowery design. Okay, all the related characteristics which we have already told have been displayed here. Now move ahead. So the bandhana, Hindi for time. Their place of origin was the Kasim Bazaar, Patna, Calcutta, Orissa, so and Charpur. So all these places were very famous, okay, for all these clothes which we have talked about. So Kasim Bazaar, Patna, Calcutta, Orissa, Charpur. So remember these places. Here another craft has been shown. Okay, the bandana design early 20th. So here is the bandana design. So bandana patterns were mostly produced in Rajasthan and Gujarat. So which were the places where the bandana designs or bandana patterns used to produce? These are the Rajasthan and Gujarat. So remember this. So we have already seen the Patan Patolas which are produced in Surat, Patan. Okay, so remember this. All these things become important when we look at the art and culture related things. Then also sometimes the straightforward question can be asked in that. Okay, so Indian textile in European market. We will read this particular paragraph, but the important thing I have already marked it. So by the early 18th century, worried by the popularity of Indian textile, so we have already seen that what was the reputation of the Indian textile. So it definitely, it must have created some sort of tension in the, or the worry to the people who were trading in the European countries. Okay, so popularity of Indian textile, wool and silk marks the markets in the makers in the England began protesting against the import of the Indian cotton textile, because the European makers or the traders were not getting profit, even though the Britishers who were there here in the Indian and were taking things from here, it was so cheap and it was so good that it was competing in the European market. Hence there was a threat that their business was not surviving because of the Indian clothes and textile, okay, because of its quality. In 1720, the British government enacted a legislation banning to use of printed cotton textile shints in England. Interestingly, this act was known as the Calico Act. Now this particular paragraph is really important. I have already highlighted it. In 1720, the condition was such that the British government has to enacted a legislation, okay, banning the use of printed cloth textile shints in England, and this particular act came to be known as the Calico Act, okay, and or Calico Act. So remember this, okay. They had to bring the official law for to compete with the Indian textile. The first to grow under the government protection was the calico printing industry. Indian designs were now limited and printed in England on the white muslin or plain unbleached Indian cloth. So what was happening then? Now when the protection has been provided to these producers or who were in the European part, so what was happening? Now they were bringing only the plain or the unbleached Indian cloth, and they were getting printed there itself. So the complete protection has been provided. So competition with the Indian textile also led to the search for the technological innovation in England. They had to go on such an extent to compete with the Indian textile that the innovation had to done in the England because of the Indian textile. It was so good in the quality and it was so cheaply available because of the, we had in that time as well, we had the a vast population, but they all were very much skilled, okay, in terms of different things. And the people who were involved in all these textile industries, they were very good, okay, and there was no competition. Hence they had to innovate these things, that how they can compete with these things which been getting developed or getting manufactured in India. Okay, so in 1764, the spinning jenny was invented by John Kay. So remember this particular name, John Kay, who invented the spinning jenny in 1764, which increased the productivity of traditional spindles. Okay, so spin jenny, inventor name John Kenny, invention done in 1764. The invention of the steam engine by Richard Arkwright or in 1786 revolutionized the cotton textile weaving. Okay, so now the steam engine by the Richard Arkwright in 1786 also helped the British industries of cotton textile. Okay, so cloth would now be woven in immense quantities and cheaply too. Now they have got all these things which was important for the not only for the development but also for the movement. Okay, and because they were getting the raw material at very cheap rate from Indian continent, so they did not have to worry about it that whether they will receive the things at the cheaper rate or not, because Indian things when Indian material of Indian textile which was getting exported from India to Britain, what was happening? There was no taxes, there was no charges applied on these export. But whenever we were bringing or we were importing these things, we were heavily taxed. So they also these policies of British Empire discriminated against and created a huge problem for the Indian weavers and the people who were in the business of these textiles. So, however, Indian textile continued to dominate in the world till the end of 18th century. Okay, so it has provided some information about the spinning jenny as well. So let us read. A machine by which a single worker could operate several spindles onto which thread was spun. When the wheel was turned, all the spindle rotated. Okay, so it was some sort of a device, okay, on which the several spindle could rotate at a time. Okay, so it must have provided a faster production of the all these things which were required. So let us move ahead. Bengal was the one of the most important center located along the numerous river in delta. Production centers in Bengal could easily transport goods to distant places. Why Bengal was able to trade with so much efficiency? Because it was supported with the rivers. Okay, we already see. Okay, so from the beginning it was a really important center for all these things related to textile and the development of the different type of cotton things. Okay, so they could easily transport all these things which are getting manufactured, or for an example, if they are producing anything which is in terms of raw material is important, they were able to transport using these riverways. Okay, so Dhaka in eastern Bengal, now Bangladesh, was the foremost textile center in the 18th century. It was famous for its malmal and jamdani weavings. Okay, so remember the Dhaka, okay, which later on came to be known as Dhaka, okay, in the eastern Bengal, was famous for malmal and jamdani weaving. Then what was happening? Who were the weavers? Let us get more information about these experts who were the weavers. The weavers often belong to the communities that specialized in weaving. The Tanti weavers of Bengal, Julhas of the Momin weavers of North India, and Sale and the Kaikolar and the Devgans of the South Indian. So it has provided the different community names. Okay, Tanti weavers belong to Bengal, Julhas from the North India, and Saleh and the Kaikolar and Devgans of the South India. Remember this. The first stage of the production was spinning, a work done mostly by women. So spinning was done by the women, and the charkha, the takli were household spinning instruments. So remember this, charkha and takli, the household spinning instrument, and later on the charkha became the symbol of the self-sustenance and used by the Mahatma Gandhi. Okay, so it has a huge importance in the Indian freedom. Okay, and the thread was spun on the charkha and rolled on the takli. So thread was spun on which? Thread was spun on the charkha, which we have already seen in the images. Okay, where Mahatma Gandhi has been shown as spinning the thread using the charkha, and it used to roll on the takli. So remember this, what was the use of charkha and what was the use of takli. In most communities, weaving was a task done by men. So weaving was done by men. So colored textile, the thread was dyed by the dyers, and these dyers used to call as the rangrej. So in contemporary world as well, you must have come across the people whom uh, uh, these dyers, the people who are indulged in dyeing the different type of clothes, they called as the is still called as the rangrej. Okay, the person who colors or dyes the cloth. Okay, for printed cloth, the weavers needed the help of a specialist block printer known as the chippigars. So what was the role of chippigars? To print cloth. Okay, the weavers needed the help of a specialist block printer. So these were the block printers who used to called as the chippigars. So the decline of the Indian textile. So we have already understood that what type of things were happening in the Europe, okay, and in the Britain. That how the textile industries was getting protection of the British Parliament, whereas the Indian textile did not receive such sort of protection, because they always treated the Indian subcontinent as their colony. Okay, hence ultimately Indian textile had to decline. The development of the cotton industry in Britain affected the textile produced in India in several ways. How? There have been two ways provided. The Indian textile now had to compete with the British textile in the European and American market. Exporting textile on England also became increasingly difficult, since very high duties were imposed on the Indian textile imported into Britain. So with these two things, we have already seen that how the whenever we used to export anything, we used to heavily tax, okay, or the duties were imposed. But whenever we used to import, there was no duties, because it was the part of the policy of the Britishers in terms of getting the amount, a huge amount, or making the huge amount of out of the import as well, because they changed the Indian subcontinent as their colony, and all they used to bring they used to take the raw material from Indian subcontinent and used to convert it into the finished good, and used to supply their finished goods to their colonies, which was India. Okay, and this was there were the other colonies as well, but the India was the biggest market. What is the orang? At the right hand side, it has provided information about orang, so I'm referring about this. A Persian term for a warehouse, a place where goods are collected before being sold, also refer to a workshop. So remember, this orang is similar to a workshop where the goods are kept, okay, or collected before being sold. So this is called as the orang. Remember this. Thousands of weavers in India were now thrown out of employment. Bengal weavers were the worst hit, because most of the people of the Bengal were indulged in all these textile related work. Hence now when the textile industry started to decline, of course they are the people who are going to the worst hit. So now what would happen? Then when they do not have any work, they must have indulged into some other work. So they now started to taking the petty works or the other works. They started to working in the fields as well. Okay, so the life of these people completely changed. So here two information or two stories has been shared, but these are of no importance for us. So let us move ahead. By 1830, British cotton cloth flooded Indian market. In fact, by the 1880s, two-thirds of all cotton clothes worn by Indians were made of cloth produced in Britain. So this was the situation. Understand? Earlier we were dominating the European market and the British market, but by the 1830 and 1880, all the situation changed, and two-thirds of all cotton were by the Indians produced in Britain. So handloom weaving did not completely die in India, though small patch of anything remains. Okay, because these things does not completely die. Few people still work in these particular fields. So Solapur in the western India and the Madura in South India, these towns emerged as important new centers of weaving in the late 19th century. So remember the names: Sholapur in western India and the Madura in southern India. Okay, so these became the prominent center of the cloth weaving. Okay, So during the national movement, Mahatma Gandhi urged people to boycott the imported textile and use the hand spun and hand woven cloth, which we know. Okay, the khadi gradually became the symbol of nationalism. The charkha came to represented India, which we have earlier talking about, that how India in Indian history, charkha played an important role, and introduction by the Mahatma Gandhi was really important. Why? Because it not only it became the symbol of nationalism, but it was a clear-cut message that we need to be self-sustaining and we do not need to dependent on the British uh, imported things. Okay, and it was put at the center of the tricolor flag of the Indian National Congress, adopted in 1931. Remember this, here the important information has been provided that the charkha was placed in the tricolor, the flag of the Indian National Congress, adopted in 1931. Remember this. So cotton mills came up. The first cotton mill in India was set up as a spinning mill in Bombay in 1854. Where? Bombay, 1854. It was the cotton mill set up as the spinning mill. From the earlier 19th century, the Bombay had grown as an important port for the export of raw cotton from India to England and China. It was close to the vast black soil tract of the western India where the cotton was grown. So the raw material was easily available, hence the production cost was low, hence they were able to send all these the cotton which was getting produced in the northwestern part of India where the black soil is available. Okay, so it ultimately resulted in the huge profit for the Britishers. So smelting, little bit information of smelting has been provided. That what is the process of smelting? The process of obtaining a metal from rock or soil by heating it very high temperature, or of melting object made from the metal in order to use the metal to make something new. It is called as the smelting. Remember this. Okay, so in smaller terms we can something by using or by obtaining metal from the rock. Okay, and out of which we can make important thing for our use. The first mill in Ahmedabad was started in 1861. A year later, a mill was established in Kanpur in the United Province. So we have seen 1854 Bombay, 1861 Ahmedabad, and 1862 Kanpur. The growth of cotton mills led to the demand for labor. Thousands of poor peasants, artisans, and the agricultural laborers moved to the cities to work in the mills. So now this led to the development of the new type of society and also the new type of cities. The colonial government in India usually refuse such protection to local industries. Okay, because we have already seen that the protection has already been given to the European companies or the British companies. Why they would provide the protection to the Indian companies? Because the Indian things were, or Indian textile was so good that there was no match in England or in the British Empire. Hence, what was happening, that why they would provide the protection to the Indian industries? Okay, they never wanted to do this. During the First World War, when the textile import from Britain declined, the Indian factories were called upon to produce the cloth for military supplies. So this war will change a lot of things for the Indians. If we look at the Indian perspectives, a lot of things will change in terms of the how the first steel industry will come, and how the requirement of the steel uh, by the Britain because it was involved in the war, that how it will change not only the textile industry once again, but also give the rise to the steel industry. So we will look at that. Okay, the sword of Tipu Sultan and Woods steel. So from this particular paragraph, we will start understanding about the steel. At the left hand side, a beautiful image of a sword has been depicted or has been shown of this particular sword used to belong to Tipu Sultan. Okay. So what was the special about it? A special type of high carbon steel called woods. So remember, these terms becomes really important. A specialized type of high carbon steel called woods, which was produced all over the South India. So this was the specialty of the South India. The woods steel, when made into salt, produced a very sharp edge. It used to produce very sharp edge with flowing water pattern. This pattern came from very small carbon crystal embedded in the iron. So the information which is important for the examination is that how wood steel is produced, okay, and how these wavy pattern of which are similar to the water patterns, how these are uh, coming. So the pattern came from the very small carbon crystal embedded in the iron. Though the Francis Buchanan, who taught through the Mysore in 1800, and he has provided the details about and the techniques about the wood steel was how it was produced. Okay, in these furnaces, iron was mixed with the charcoal and put inside small clay pots, whose is an anglicized version. Okay, version of the Kannada word ukku, Telugu hukku, and the Tamil and the Malayalam urukku, meaning steel. All the terms are related to steel. Okay, so Indian wood steel fascinated European scientists, whom Michael Faraday, the legendary scientist, and who did the discovery of the electricity and the electromagnetism, spent 4 years studying the properties of the Indian woods from 1818 to 1822. So it was the prominence and it was the importance of this particular steel. Okay, so we were so much advanced in terms of producing the steel. So abundant furnaces in the villages, that how these earlier, which were the important thing for the Indian subcontinent, because there were the kings and kingdoms who used to use these swords and other things, and this for that they were dependent on the people who were the expert on making, and for that the furnaces were really important and the expert people were important. But later on, when these Britishers got the control, then how the things changed. So let us see that. The production of wood steel required a highly specialized technique of iron, refining iron. The smelting was done by men while women worked the bellows. So what is bellows? Below at the right hand side, and information has been provided. Bellows are a device for equipment that can pump air. So bellow was equipment through which, using this, they used to pump the air. Okay, so pumping air that kept the charcoal burning. Okay, smelting was done by men and women worked as the bellows. So image has been depicted, but we cannot understand more by this. So let us read the more information. So it has provided the information about the Agarias, a community of iron smelters. So Agarias, who were the Agarias? Agarias were the community of iron smelters. So Agarias specialized in the craft of the iron smelting. By the late 19th century, however, the craft of iron smelting was in decline. So we have already understood the characteristic that why and the reason that why this particular art was in decline. One reason was the new forest law that we have seen in the earlier chapter, that when the tribal people were not allowed to stay in the forest, okay, because they already, the Britishers announced these forest as the protected forest. Okay, so from where did these people would receive the wood for the charcoal, and where would they get the iron ore? Because these things can only, so these were the raw material. Charcoal and the iron ore was the raw material for producing the steel, and from where these people would be able to get this? There was no chance. So many gave up their crafts and looked for the other means of livelihood, because there was no other opportunities apart from this particular, because earlier they were indulged in producing the steel. Now since the steel production has gone down and declined because of the policies, then there was no other opportunity uh, apart from looking for the new livelihood opportunities. By the late 19th century, iron and steel was being imported from Britain. So one another victory of the British, that how they started to import the British produced the iron in India. So this inevitably lowered the demand for the iron produced by the local smelters. Okay, so iron and steel factories come up in India. How? First, the year was 1904, when the Charles Weld, an American geologist. So remember these names which are going to be introduced in this particular paragraph. So Charles Weld, who was the American geologist, along with the Dorabji Tata, the eldest son of Jamsetji Tata, traveling in Chhattisgarh. Why? in the search of good iron, okay, so that they could produce the steel, because they wanted to establish the plant. So before that, we need to understand about the slag heap. What is the slag heap? The waste left when smelting the metal. So the waste which has been produced during this smelting of metal is called as the slag heap. Okay. So when they were these people, Charles Weld and the Dorabji Tata, who were traveling in the Chhattisgarh looking for the iron. So they come across with the Agarias once again. How? The Weld and Dorabji come upon a small village and found a group of men and women carrying the basket load of iron. These people were the Agarias, and they introduced that where these people could find or the iron ore. Okay, on exploring the hill, the geologists declared that they had at last found what they have been looking for. So it has provided a particular name of the hills. Rajhara Hills had one of the finest ores in the world. Okay, the Agarias helped in the discovery of the source of iron ore that would later supply the Bhilai steel plant. Remember this. So Agarias have been a great help in terms of providing the places where the uh, iron could be searched, okay, or iron could be and such. In we can say that the different type of mines can be introduced. Okay, so later these particular places where the iron was found, it started supplying to the Bhilai steel plant. A few years later, a large area of forest was cleared because the mines used to be introduced on the banks of the river Shubharna Rekha to set up the factory, and an industrial township Jamshedpur was set up. Okay, so where it was set up? On the river Shubharna Rekha. Okay, a large tract of area was cleared so that they could easily mine the iron ore. The Tata Iron and Steel Company (TISCO), Tata Iron and Steel Company (TISCO), that came up began producing the steel in 1912. So India was importing steel that was manufactured in Britain earlier. And how this complete scenario will change? Let us read this particular paragraph. By the time TISCO was set up, the situation was changing. How? In the 1914, the First World War broke out. Steel producing in Britain now had to meet the demands of the war in Europe. Okay, so imports of British steel into India declined dramatically, and Indian Railway turned to TISCO for the supply of the rails. Okay, because they were lying these rails, okay, and to supply the raw material or the steel for these rails, they needed the steel, and they turned to the TISCO. As the war dragged on for several years, TISCO had to produce shells and carriages wheels for the war. By 1919, colonial government was buying 90% of the steel manufactured by TISCO. So how this particular war changed the situation completely. Okay, so Indian company became so important and dominant that the 19% of the steel manufactured by TISCO were being bought by these colonial government. Okay, so over time TISCO became the biggest steel industry within the British Empire. This was the situation. How the situation was completely changed. Earlier they did not want to provide any sort of protection to the Indian industry. Now they were completely relied on the Indian industry. As in the case of the cotton textile also, the industry expansion occurred only when the British imports into India declined and the market for the Indian textile or industry good increased. This happened during the First World War. So for the textile also, these particular situation changed completely. As the nationalist movement developed and the industrial class became stronger, the demand for the government protection became louder, that now you will need to provide the protection to the Indian industries as well, because we are providing a large chunk of these stuff which you require for the war. Understand, these situation completely changed. So we have understood that how the Indian textile and the steel manufacturing, which were earlier very prominent, was declined, but later on the situation changed. So we have come across really important terms such as the wood steel, okay, and the Tesco. So remember all these instances, okay, all these terms, okay, and try to remember them. Though I have already highlighted, just go through the chapter, listen it, okay, and you would be able to recall and remember this particular chapter. So I will see you in the next chapter. Till then, Jai Hind.